Thank you so much for the introduction, and welcome also on my behalf. So usually the last presentation after the last break is always the worst because you're already concerned with your work and all the emails you have to answer after the conference, but I hope that you will like the presentation. So I want to talk about personal communication. So why is personal communication so important for us humans? But how come? Because we can all exchange information very fast, or let's say even faster, virtually, online, etc. So we initiated a studies at the beginning of the year which focused on trade fairs, and it really highlighted what we missed most during the COVID pandemic. I will go deeper into detail about these studies during my presentation, but I will start and we'll get there step by step. So first, I want to give you a short introduction on why communication is so important. Then we'll do a small experiment. Don't be scared. It will be a funny experiment and it's vegan. Afterwards, I will present 10 theses, and finally, I want to present my conclusions and implications, and depending on whether you want to do it or not, we will have a question and answer session. So, my boss always says that business is done between humans. So, usually if someone wakes us up during night or no matter when, communication is always important. So there's always been these discussions where people said so much is being done on the computer and personal communication is not that necessary. However, during the last 19 months, we've had the opportunity to try out to see how important personal exchange and encounters are really to us. And the results of this experiment are impressive. And the result is radical. So communication, personal encounters, touching each other, seeing each other in person, at trade fairs, at seminars, were really something that people missed a lot. So actually, we asked people what they missed the most, and trade fairs, seminars, interactions were something that they answered a lot. And another thing is our concerns digitalization. So pre-COVID, approximately 10% of all business meetings were carried out virtually, and now it's 80%. And almost 90% of all the people that we ask, of the interviewees, say that there will even be more video calls and conferences in the future. 10% knew online trade fairs pre-COVID, and now it's 2/3 of all interviewees that know online trade fairs. So there's a knowledge that has been transferred and created during the last months. However, 77% of all interviews stated that they missed the personal encounters and personal contact, for example, at trade fairs, most. And they consider it much more valuable than they did before. So when in the past people said they care so much about personal encounters, they really do mean it now. But besides communication, there are other things. And now it's the time for our experiment. Don't worry, you will not have to do anything difficult. It's called the waffle test. And I want to show what's another important aspect besides communication. So all of you who are watching online from your kitchen, from your living room, from your terrace, you will see that we are giving people a snack, and you here in the hall, you can touch the snack, you can touch the bar, it's almost vegan, and there's another bar, this one. This one is cheaper. And everyone here will be able to actually answer if it's worth paying a bit more, spending a bit more money on the more expensive bar, or if they would rather buy the cheaper bar, the copy of the original. And maybe some experts can confirm that they're both produced in the same way. You in front of the screens can't join the contest or the experiment right now, but feel free to use your knowledge and go to a store and tell the others. So why are trade fairs so important? Because we go there as a potential client, we can take a look at the product, we can compare it to other products, we can taste it, we can feel it, we can touch it. So this is a important function of a trade fair. But this has been important before there were alternative ways of communication. And what I've also heard today, Mr. Nothoff said it. He said, finally, we have trade fairs again. He's really looking forward to the next Interlift. And Mr. Lotze is looking forward to personal meetings with clients and colleagues and friends. And Mrs. Rabarelli said she was looking forward to meeting everyone again. And this is what I mean. We all need personal encounters and face-to-face communication. But why is it? Why is that? So one major aspect that we often oversee, especially men tend to oversee this or chronically ignore this, we have to take a look at our human operating system, and the major components or essential parts of the human operating system are still at the level they were when we were still migrating across the savannas. This leads to the fact that we actually have a really effective ways of distancing between friends or foes, because we didn't have any arms, we needed to protect ourselves, and we needed to recognize real fast who was a friend, who was a foe, where there was an opportunity or a chance or a risk. So this behavior is something that we still have inside of us. We've internalized it, and we react when we see fruits, for example, whether we like it or not. But that's also the main reason why the fruit section in all supermarkets is right at the beginning at the supermarket, and it's also why they have special lights so that the red apple looks even brighter and the vegetables look even brighter, because the human software inside of our brain recognizes it as a chance. It tells us to stop and take a look immediately. And some of you might hear the voice of your mother right now, who always told you when you were a child that you should eat more fruits and more vegetables, and this all plays a part. And then we have different behaviors that are difficult to explain if you don't know the aspect of this operational system. And digital communication is not part of this operational system at all. And already when I was a child, I thought it was so fascinating when I observed people that were on a phone call and they used their hands and different gestures to express themselves. And that's really because our operational system does not know that we're not actually speaking face to a person. It still kind of tells our body, our hands to gesture and while we are talking. So as I just said, our operational system tells us who's friend or foe, where there's a risk or an opportunity. However, there are a lot of errors. And right now we are able to actually cover different aspects that come up. We now use all senses to assess the person in front of us and to assess whether this person is a friend or foe. So you right now were able to taste the bar, eat it, touch it, smell it. You were able to use all of your senses. However, in total, you can say that the more senses you can use to determine whether a person is a friend or a foe, the more confident you are that you've made the right decision. And this is something that is not possible if you communicate remotely or virtually. The exchange of language is also much more imprecise online or virtually. That was a shock for the linguists that work in the IT sector, that work in language or voice recognition when they programmed everything. So when people say something, it's possible that they mean entirely different things. So identical codes can convey completely different contents. You can say something, but you mean something else. So our brain knows this without thinking about it too much because the brain uses contextual knowledge to interpret the codes. And I have a client, or I had a client at CeBIT for clients who actually wanted to complain. And then people came there, they were angry, and they say, wow, what a great product, and they were throwing on the table. So what they said was the product is great, but they meant the opposite. So what they actually did was talking in a sarcastic way. We as humans learned to interpret context, to recognize context, and we can make use of language in a different way than machines are able to. So language does not only convey information, but it also serves other aspects. And this is important for the communication between humans, for interpersonal communication. There are two theorists, Mr. Václavík and Mr. Thun, maybe you remember them. They have actually wrote a lot of theories on the models of communication. And my favorite example is the neighbor who comes out of the door. He sees his neighbor and says, wow, what a weather. So the computer would not know what to make out of the sentence. What do you mean by saying what a weather? Rain, sun, what do you mean? So the computer does not see the context. And saying, wow, what a weather is also not about asking the neighbor how the weather is. And also, if there's the man sitting in front of the TV telling someone else, "Oh, I'm out of beer," they don't really want to just neutrally say that they're out of beer, but they want to do is ask you to get them another bottle of beer. So our languages is also a lot about requesting things indirectly. And as we communicate, we also try to read the other person's face. You can already see that or observe this when you look at children. Once they start understanding something or understand language, they see adults and they hear that someone is saying something but that doesn't match their behavior. They recognize it immediately. And this is something that the eyes actually can't do. And this is why also persons who sell bad products to other people, they have to learn to recognize the face expressions of the other person. So why do they raise their brows, etc. So what we're saying is, or what I'm saying is, we're trying to figure out what the person really means.
Interestingly, it also applies to modulation in the voice. So if the daughter of my wife is calling, then she just has to hear a fragment of the first sound to know if she's well or not. So in the modulation of the voice, we hear how the other person is feeling. And the body speaks as well. That's a big problem with actors, for example. You have to teach your body to show something different than how you're actually feeling. So it's also like that in conversations about application, for example, that you just in job interviews, that you have to show something you're not actually feeling at that moment because you will be nervous. So people try to show that they're very strong, confident, big, even though they're actually scared. Or maybe the other way around. So if somebody really has charisma, then that makes a very different impression, even though you don't really have to communicate it consciously. Thesis number 7. We also smell. It might sound weird, but the smell is an aspect that is a little tricky because it enters into the brain right away without any filter. So many companies really find a certain smell really important. So people also recognize the smell and smell how the other person, and hotels do it too. It's a certain signature fragrance. People also do it on the trade fair. They have a certain smell there, and they continue it in their store, for example. And we do that, and we have a very good detector to notice whether the other person is in an aggressive mood, for example. Maybe something different in the air. You never know. So it has an effect right away. It's a very difficult channel to check, to assess, but it has an impact on our assessment of the other person. Thesis number 8, the sense of touch. So before you opened the little plastic of your chocolate, the snack I gave you, maybe you felt how does it feel exactly, and we also say that, well, if we touch something, we really get it. So the sense of touch is very, very important for us. It's also important in the interpersonal communication. At least before COVID, it was normal to give your hand, to shake hands. And then your evaluation of another person may change drastically if you feel the hand of the other person. You could say, oh, I don't trust him, or and if somebody has a very wet, lax handshake, then you might find the person insecure, and it's very, very difficult to fake it, because it's something your body expresses. So we can use that for the evaluation or the assessment of the other person. So there are many channels we can use for this assessment, even though we don't actually know them consciously. And the more of the channels we use, the more likely it is that we feel confident in our judgment. To say, for example, wow, that's a person who really believes in what he says, or that's a person, I'm not going to buy anything from him. So those are the channels we have, and the more we use, the better. And we also have the possibility to have intellectual decodation, so we can talk to the people and analyze what they say. So I get the information from the conversation. But what happens is that there is an interchanging of information, and then I can assess the person and I can decode the intellectual content of what he or she is saying. And then we can create trust or not. And that's a key factor for us in order to make a decision, because there's always a certain risk. And it's not that bad when I'm just buying chocolate. And if I buy the wrong thing, maybe ja is not from the same plant, doesn't come from the same plant, it doesn't taste as well. Okay, I lose €1.20. But if I make decisions about investments, for example, in digitalization, then I have to make a good decision. If I want to invest in predictive maintenance, for example, then much more is at stake. Jobs, for example, the supply chain, and so on. So I really need to trust them. What does that mean? We prefer, and it's quite clear, we prefer the direct communication, because it is the most effective way for the building of trust and confidence. With a few tricks, you can evade and avoid this multisensoric way. For example, how that's what they teach people who work in sales, how they can use their language, how they can really make a use of it and trick somebody into buying something. And the other person might be tricked. You could also get up during a conversation, but then you're not really convincing somebody, but talking somebody into something. So those are so-called B2B businesses. So if somebody needs a solution for a production problem, for example, then on the long run, it's not worth it talking somebody into something, persuading somebody, but we really, really need to convince the person. So the construction of long-term business relations depends on the interpersonal communication. The good message is, if I actually build confidence and trust without disappointing, then the personal communication can be reduced. Because then I can have really short conversation in a video call because you know them. Like my wife hears right away, is she well, isn't she? So if I really know the person, then you know, okay, I can trust him. Whatever he just said is something I can trust in, and I will accept the proposal, for example. But it has to be refreshed from time to time, not only for Christmas. So, let's have a look at the implications. In the last 19 months, digital communication have significantly gained ground. The people learned to use various technologies and compensate for a lack of direct exchange, so they can use the different channels with different efficiencies. But we could also learn that the face-to-face encounters are extremely valuable and essential and has been missed. And that's very important for new business relations. So if you ask the people who actually work in the sector, it is very different if you have a face-to-face conversation, if you compare it to an online trade fair, for example, for new businesses. So 69% of the people say that the online trade fair is inferior to the real trade fair. So the event in presence is much more important. Or be it in a cafe where you meet up and talk about the weather, but it's about the actualization of how the other person feels. That's how it starts. 71% of the people say that if it's about creating new business relations, the trade fair in presence is the key tool. We also asked what the people missed in the last 19 months. Has to be adapted a little. And what people missed most is personal communication, touch, experiencing, smelling, and so on. But most people missed inspiration. 92% of the people said they were missing inspiration. As interesting as YouTube videos can be and online conferences can be, this very special mixture of accidental encounters, coincidence, and the combination of re-encountering the people and so on, I cannot replace that with an online tool. 92%, those are very exceptional values. This is why, as long as humans can't update, and that might happen at some point, as long as humans can't update their operating system, personal encounters will remain the undisrupted royal road to building trust and establishing long-term business relationships. We need the other technologies, but, and I think in the future there will be less interpersonal communication, but we learned that it is very valuable and that it gets less, yes, in the future, but it is still the way for long-term business relationships, because you really can estimate how the other person is feeling. Okay, so this was the brief the brief way into communication theory. Yes, we have some questions. So if the industry, if you didn't know already what you were missing, now you know what you're missing. you were missing. We saw it in the past few weeks. I don't know. We met a few times, but do you trust us? Yes, I do. I do. So I am a trade fair man, and the Interlift was subject of my doctor's thesis, and I published, I don't know if Adenauer was the Chancellor of Germany already back then, but I think sometime at that point. So you did your dissertation in kindergarten, right? Almost. So how do your students communicate nowadays? Maybe you can tell us a little about that. Is the communication different in this generation? Yes, there's this prejudice, ancient prejudice, and it says that in the pyramids were decoded with hieroglyphs. No, the Greeks were sure that the next generation would break down or break the world, and that the world will end because of the next generation, but it's not like that. And we can see that very well, especially with this experiment of the last few months. We can see how the structures work, how the networks work we built during our study at the university. It's very, very essential for us. And it's the opportunity to build relations of trust and to take it out into the world. And people missed that. That is true. And they missed it so much that they met illegally. They met illegally at the university. So your students found the illegal way. What did you do? Well, we had to meet in public, and that happens anyway. We couldn't avoid it. But it's clear I missed a lot of stuff. And personally, I love sarcastic jokes, and I noticed that online people didn't understand them. So that can create real problems if people misunderstand you and you cannot correct it right away. Yes, that confirms my thesis. Never mix emails with emotions. But then we just need an update. When will it come? Right. It's very difficult to say that. So we can not count on natural selection. That's true. But maybe we can transfer our minds on hard drives and then mirror it into the digital world, and then it would make a lot of stuff easier, but I believe I'm not gonna experience that in my life. True, I think I don't need that either. Thank you very much, Professor Prüser. It was a very, very nice presentation and a good conclusion to our conference today.